Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition, powered by the Center Square. I'm Greg Bishop, Illinois editor at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square reporter Jim Talamonte and I will discuss ongoing concerns about public safety and immigration enforcement, the city of Chicago's looming budget deadline, and the upcoming primary elections. All of that and more when we return for more Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition, powered by the Center Square.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. The week started off with Governor J.B. Pritzker holding a bill signing ceremony to expand the state's migrant sanctuary policies. The Center Square's Jim Talamonte was there in Chicago for the impassioned speeches, but also able to get reaction from opponents to putting up barriers to immigration enforcement. Jim, the state already has the Trust Act and the Way Forward Act, but now we have this new measure that passed in the early morning hours of Halloween in October to wrap up veto session. What exactly does this bill do?
Well, it does a lot, Greg. It's actually kind of a package of several acts in one, almost like an omnibus, if you will. And it does a lot, although it's, as the governor said, it enhances protections for immigrants, but at the same time, it opens up a whole new world of potential litigation that could even affect immigrants in some cases. But there are several aspects of this. First of all, it essentially aims to prevent, and I say aims to prevent, immigration enforcement around courthouses, healthcare facilities, higher education campuses, and daycare centers. And there are all kinds of regulations, mandates, and potential potential civil liabilities that come with this. House Bill 1312, you mentioned impassioned speeches. There were many, especially from the Democrat majority leaders in each chamber, Speaker Welch and Senate President Harmon, both just before the bill passed and then at the press conference this past week. And so what happens is the legislation prohibits or aims to prohibit the civil arrest of anyone in or around courthouses attending certain state court proceedings. And so there could then be a private right of action if there is what the state calls false imprisonment, including statutory damages of $10,000 if the person knew or should have known the person arrested was attending a state court proceeding. The idea would be to prevent federal immigration enforcement officers from arresting people when they're going to court, whether that's whatever kind of case they might be going to. And then this extends also to hospitals who must implement policies regarding interactions with law enforcement agents, and must implement these policies by January 1st. Higher education. Schools cannot take certain actions regarding the actual or perceived immigration status of students, employees, or those associated with them. So you can see that this is casting a wide net in all of these different areas. And then daycares will now be banned from sharing actual or perceived immigration status of children or associated persons unless required by law. And Illinois Department of Children and Family Services and Department of Early Childhood will have to provide Know Your Rights materials, preparedness plans, and other resources to families online. There's no, as far as I've seen in the legislation, no estimated cost of all this, but certainly there's a time and labor cost here when you're talking about state government trying to get all of this done. And licensed daycare centers are required to adopt plans of actions for interacting with enforcement agents and notifying parents if an agent requests a child's information. All this also has to be done by January 1st. So, a lot to cover here. You just picture some daycares are very small, and then daycare operators will have to put all this together here in a matter of 3 weeks is when we're talking about the new year starting. So there are a lot of provisions, a lot of mandates, a lot of potential civil liability. One thing that the House Republicans brought up when this was on the House floor before it passed was that federal supremacy here may prevent or may prevent any kind of action against federal agents from being constitutional. So then the question is, as a Republican floor leader Patrick Windhorst said, and he is an attorney, so who then will be liable? Who will be exposed to civil liability? He said, we don't know. And once again, at the press conference this week, nobody seemed to be able to nail that down. I'm talking about the governor or any of the lawmakers or activists who were up there who were behind this legislation. So that still carries with it House Bill 1312 a whole lot of questions, even though it has now been signed into law.
A whole lot of questions and a whole lot of potential litigation in the courts. Jim, we're going to talk about Illinois and several counties landing on the judicial hellhole list a little bit later on when we discuss the economy. But I can imagine that a law like this that opens up more potential litigation is not going to fare well for groups like American Tort Reform Foundation in their review of states and how litigious of an environment it is. And you actually asked the governor about one particular aspect of this bill. Of course, it deals with federal immigration enforcement, but that litigation aspect and questions of potential conflicts or just the ethics of this bill.
Absolutely. When you look at it, the Illinois Tri-Lawyers Association, which I reached out to them, they did not have any comment on this back when it passed. They have been donors for several years to Illinois House Speaker Welch and Illinois Senate President Harmon. Last summer, the Political Action Committee for the Illinois Tri-Lawyers Association gave $25,000 each to Welch and Harmon and $25,000 each to Democrats for the Illinois House, Democrats, the fund to elect Democrats to the Illinois Senate, and the entire Democratic Party of Illinois. So a lot of money. You're talking about well into six figures to those groups. And this came after the General Assembly had already passed very lawsuit-friendly legislation that Illinois Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse opposed during the summer. Now, Illinois Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, when I reached out to them about this piece of legislation, House Bill 1312, they did not have a position on it. But yeah, it certainly screams the question, is pay to play too strong a word? Perhaps I didn't use that in my question to the governor, but I said, well, did you review this? How carefully did you review the ethics of this, given these campaign donations to Welch and Harmon? And he said, well, let's step back and remember the purpose of this is to protect the people of Illinois from the onslaught of federal agents. But then he did say that many attorneys looked at the language and he said he thought it was in good shape and the bill was done with good intentions. Now, Senate President Harmon, when this was in committee, said, we know this is going to be challenged. And the governor essentially reiterated that, saying, well, no doubt people have the ability to go to court over it. But he said, I believe it's not just a good law, but a great law. The impacts of it still to be seen. But you just certainly it may entirely be legal, but the campaign donations followed by the legislation certainly raises some questions in a state where we just haven't seen any kind of movement on ethics legislation, really nothing significant now in several years.
No question. And obviously you can read more about this at thecentersquare.com. And Jim, the questions about the ethics of it and the litigious environment, obviously that's an important aspect of this story, but just the nuts and bolts of this as well, expanding the state's migrant sanctuary policies. You had a pretty impassioned speech from State Senator Omar Aquino saying, it's time to stand up and push back against what Democrats think is overreach by the Trump administration in enforcing federal law. But Republicans, they say that none of this street action of DHS and ICE, quote, flooding the zone would happen in Illinois if it wasn't for the state's migrant sanctuary policies. Tell us what John Cabello had to say about just simply cooperating.
Yeah, and he said, this is happening. Essentially, this has become what it has become in Illinois, or became what it became, and we had the really heavy enforcement here with Operation Midway Blitz simply because of the state's refusal to cooperate. And John Cabello said the government is going after illegal aliens, people who broke the law, but he said many of them are the worst of the worst. And several people have suggested, if the state would even cooperate a little, and work with the federal government, perhaps then the federal government would respond in kind and say, okay, we'll really only focus on the worst of the worst, and we won't sweep up the nannies in the park and the tamale vendors on the street and that kind of thing. We'll really target, but when we're not getting cooperation, things are going to intensify. Now, in Louisiana, we've seen just the opposite, where the federal government is praising law enforcement in Louisiana for their cooperation. But of course, in Illinois, it's not necessarily up to law enforcement. They're not allowed to cooperate because of state law. And John Cabello just is one of several Republican state lawmakers who is currently works in law enforcement and has a lot of experience. So he said, and we've seen cases day after day of not the majority, but a significant number of many cases, recent arrivals who have been involved in alleged criminal activities. And so these are the people, as Cabello said, that the federal government is going after, just cooperate, and all of this could have been avoided. But at least so far, we just haven't seen any desire on the part of most of our state leaders to cooperate with the federal government.
Yeah, obviously that's going to be an ongoing story we cover, Jim, about immigration enforcement, but also the state's end of cash bail and the stories that we continue to see of people who have been arrested dozens of times getting back out on the street with no cash bail, committing horrific acts. So that as well is something that we'll continue to cover with the Center Square. But Jim, sticking on public safety and in transitioning to Chicago's budget, the federal government's threatening more withholding of funds to have the city focus on Chicago Transit Authority public safety. What's going on there?
Yeah, the Federal Transit Administration, that's the FTA, sent a letter to Governor Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson this week. And again, a quick turnaround here, ordering enhanced security on the CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority, in the wake of violent incidents. And the FTA pointed not only to recent incidents that have gained a lot of attention, most notably a woman being set on fire on the CTA Blue Line. September of 2024, 4 people were murdered on the CTA Blue Line train. There were other incidents. There's been quite a number of assaults and batteries and those kinds of things. But going back and providing data and saying that over a period of years, assaults on CTA trains, buses, and CTA property have gone up 150%, and assaults against CTA workers have gone up. So the federal government essentially kind of following the line of the immigration enforcement situation, say, well, if you're not going to enforce this and do something, keep people safe, we're going to step in. And so Mark Molinaro, the FTA administrator, sent these letters to Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson saying, outlining what the CTA needs to do. And there needs to be a response here in the next week on part of it, and then for a security plan that would go through the transit board that I think extends to the end of the year. But yeah, the federal government taking note of what's going on in terms of Chicago public transit, specifically Chicago, and the threat from Molinaro is, and Governor Pritzker responded rather forcefully to this, saying it was a threat from Molinaro, although Molinaro didn't use the word threat, but he said funds will be withheld if the CTA doesn't act. And then Governor Pritzker said, well, this is the federal government threatening state and local government with taking away federal funds for a purpose they're not allowed to. Now, Pritzker didn't clarify why the federal government wouldn't be able to withhold the funds that federal taxpayers pay to the federal government. I'm not sure why they wouldn't be allowed. He didn't clarify that, but
it's interesting, Jim, that he talks about that when we reflect on what happened during the COVID pandemic. There were threats of withholding public education dollars from schools that didn't require masks or do social distancing. It's interesting to hear the governor criticize this from the Trump administration wanting to withhold federal funds.
And he then extended, he said, well, we've already done this. We've addressed public safety on the CTA by passing transit legislation, which the large transit bill, $1.5 billion package that raises sales taxes or will raise sales taxes and does raise tolls on suburban Illinois tollways, suburban Chicago tollways, and takes gas money from the state's road fund. This package also includes measures that intend to improve safety and security but this hasn't been signed into law yet. Nothing's happening right now. So for people who are currently being shot, stabbed, attacked, set on fire on public transit in Chicago, the federal government's not waiting for this new transit package to take effect. The federal government's acting now. But Pritzker said, well, we've addressed this. And Mayor Brandon Johnson says, well, we're addressing safety in Chicago. And the mayor actually didn't rule out, while he was very critical of the Trump administration, he didn't rule out when a reporter asked him, is it time for security on the CTA to carry guns instead of just having dogs, because the dogs don't seem to be quite doing enough. And he didn't rule it out. He said, but it's not a decision we make in isolation. This will be a collective decision. So who else he would be consulted, we can only speculate. But on the other hand, in Chicago, Chicago Flips Red, the group that's a grassroots Republican group, said, well, they keep wanting more taxes, but they can't, the Chicago officials can't secure a train car or keep people safe. So the debate continues, it's not going away, but we'll see. Mayor Johnson did say he would respond to Molinaro's letter from the FDA. Pritzker didn't say. You would expect that he would respond in some way. But we'll see how quickly the CTA acts in response to the federal government, because the Chicago Transit Authority traditionally has not been a quickly moving agency.
Not just on this issue, Jim, but some would argue that they're not quick on getting people where they need to go either. But Jim, with Chicago, obviously, and again, you're on top of this being in Chicago and watching what happens with the Chicago City Council, and you can read reports at thecentersquare.com. But the clock's ticking. No real movement on the proposed budget here for the city. They've got until the end of the month to pass that, and we thought maybe a week goes by and they'll have some more clarity, but things seem to be more muddier than they were last week.
Yeah, it's still a stalemate, no question about that. Yesterday's council meeting did bring a new wrinkle, that aldermen have now presented their own plan. This is a large group of aldermen, enough to pass a budget. Doesn't look like it's enough to pass with enough to override a potential mayoral veto. And the plan from aldermen, if anyone was looking for a truly, austere or, one that's going to really cut spending, no, it removes the mayor's corporate head tax proposal, which has proven to be increasingly unpopular among aldermen and residents. But the plan, the alternative budget presented by aldermen, includes some efficiency measures, but also adds taxes on some liquor sales and ride shares, would also account for video gaming revenue, which the mayor has not supported in the past, the expansion of video gaming terminals into Chicago, although state legislators and the General Assembly, who are both in Chicago and around the state, have called for this, for video gaming terminals to be legalized in Chicago. That would be part of the alderman's proposal. And the other part that's drawing opposition from the mayor and others, higher garbage collection fees. The garbage collection fees would go from, I believe it's $9 or $9.50 to $15, and the mayor said he would not support that. That would be something he would veto because it would place a burden on working people. So he's digging in on his side. There is a 7-figure ad campaign behind his budget. There are also people spending to oppose the mayor's budget with ads. So you think if you put the two ad campaigns together, you could put a dent in things a little bit. But So both sides are digging in. The deadline is December 31st. It's not clear that both sides are now saying, especially the aldermen, this is a city government shutdown is looming. How many government services would be interrupted? We're not exactly sure, but the mayor said, if things aren't funded, it does create a real problem. And he says he and his team are looking into contingency scenarios. He's insisting a budget will get passed, but he's saying we are looking into things just in case a budget doesn't get passed. But he had only one more city council meeting scheduled before the end of the year. Well, aldermen who are in favor of more efficiencies added 5 additional meetings, or set 5 meetings between now and the end of the year. So, and this is something that overrode the mayor's ally, the budget committee chair, Alderman Jason Irvin, the alderman who want an alternative budget, who opposed the head tax, which is a significant majority. They've set meetings for 4 days next week and December 23rd. So there could be a whole lot. Now, if something gets done before then, obviously we wouldn't have that many meetings, but the potential is for a whole lot of city council activity, a whole lot of city council chamber speeches, and perhaps something getting done, but it would be uncharted territory if we get past December 31st without a budget, and who only knows what city government will look like in that situation. We just haven't been there before.
Jim, it almost feels like how Illinois state government puts their budget together. They have the entire year to sit down and to crunch the numbers and to start from zero and go up, but we always seem to be waiting until the last minute, until the wee hours of the morning on the last day of scheduled session before we actually get a good, clear picture of how they're going to be spending our tax dollars. The city of Chicago taxpayers are going to be feeling that as we get closer to the holidays. And while you and I may have thought, hey, we could get a little bit of a breather around Christmas, we're probably going to have to be monitoring this pretty closely to keep people up to date on how their tax dollars are going to be spent. Jim, let's talk a little bit about the economy. President Donald Trump held a roundtable impacting farmers. Of course, agriculture is a major industry in the state of Illinois. Tell us about how Trump's touting what's going to be the golden age for farmers.
Yeah, the president announced $11 billion in federal government aid for farmers, with an additional $1 billion coming. His agriculture secretary, Brooke Rollins, said, but that additional $1 billion, she said they're holding, but that's likely going to be headed to specialty crops, whereas the $11 billion would go to your traditional row crop producers. So this is coming in what the president and his administration says is due to the Biden administration policies that just made things awful for farmers. Of course, both House and Senate Democrats at the U.S. Capitol, well, they're saying, no, this is due to the Trump tariffs. This is a bailout to try to help farmers to undo the damage, or at least partially undo the damage that the Trump administration has done. So a whole lot of partisan rhetoric on both sides of this one. Illinois' agricultural sector estimated over $26.4 billion. Illinois Democrats have said that the soybean exports are way down because of tariffs. On the other hand, Illinois U.S. Rep. Mike Bost of Southern Illinois said this was great news from the Trump administration after years of unstable markets and no trade deals under the Biden and Harris administration. This bridge program will provide real relief to producers who've been stretched thin through the years. So the president, Donald Trump, also said he has moved to eliminate the estate tax. That's something that has been at times a contentious issue in Illinois. He says this will help farmers, as will ending some of the equipment mandates. The president saying old equipment's better, and ending the green mandates. There is short-term relief coming.
And of course, you can read about that and so much more that we just did not have time to cover today with Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition. Get to thecentersquare.com, sign up for the newsletter to get these headlines and more in your inbox each and every morning. Jim, thank you so much for joining us, and listeners can keep up with these stories and more at thecentersquare.com.